Design has a job. It has to communicate the message. That's how art and design are different. Design has a job. It goes to work. It has to communicate the message. If it doesn't do that, then it didn't work. Art is different, right? It's presenting a personal expression, that sort of thing. Can art be design? Absolutely. Can design be art? Yes. They overlap. They're best friends. Anything that we're adding to our posters, we are doing so with thought. We're doing so with the intention of it supporting our content. Example, back at the beginning of the internet, well before you were born, if we wanted to show off our design skills, we would put a 3D dancing baby on our website. And it was hideous, but it showed some sort of interest. So pretty shiny things, or showing the capability of your work, we don't need to do that. We need to support the content that we're pushing out there, and we can do that with the elements of visual design. We can use those things wisely to support our content. Color is the first thing. Color can help support our content. If you're on campus or you get an email and it's filled with maroon and gold, you know who that's from, right? You know that it's something about ASU. That color is representing that. Sports team, same thing. That is representing and telling us a message. It's telling our brains this is about ASU, it's from ASU, something like that. So the color is automatically doing this. I can't see all of your pictures, but I can see the ones that have maroon in the background and go, you're ASU. You're branded right there. I can see your ASU background. And now, even though your pictures are so tiny on my screen, I know I have some information about that. It's communicating something to me visually. So the first thing a viewer actually sees is color. Our brains process information and they take in a lot of information. Research or data, use earthy colors. You might use green, you might use browns, you might use something that evokes that feeling of nature, right? And if you have something that's very business, you might use blue. 80% of Fortune 500 companies use blue in their logo in some way. It's not random. It's for a reason. Using our color is going to be the first thing that folks see and make their first decision on whether or not they are going to consume your information, if they're going to continue on. So using color can help attract our visitors. It can also help support that content. If I have a call to action, I want someone to click here, or I want someone to look here first, I might make that color really bright and contrasting from everything else on the page so that the person is drawn into it, right? If I'm looking at right now, I have this great blue blazer on and there's a lot of it filling the screen, but this Helvetica poster in the back has got this bright orange color. So you probably notice it first, which is cool. It represents me too. Serifs feel very formal. Serifs are the letters that have little bit. That choice alone is going to tell you something. If you put it's going to be taken as probably more childish, if you know what I'm talking about. There's a place for Comic Sans, probably not on your research poster unless it's about, I don't know, children's psychology. I don't know, clown colleges, but whatever. You want to limit those from 1 to 3 fonts. You don't want to use too many, otherwise it becomes sort of a ransom note. The other thing is shapes. So shapes being geometric, being organic, they can really help support your content as well. And I'm not so much saying that you're adding shapes to your content, but a lot of times if we border around it, or more rounded edges is going to feel very different. Or if it has a more organic shape that doesn't seem to comply to any sort of, geometry, that is also going to give us a feeling and a clue about the kind of content that we're looking at. And if you want to make your poster really stand out in a sea of posters, sustainable. And then the last one is texture, rough and smooth. You can absolutely put texture within a 2D environment. We are faking the brain to make it think that there is more depth that's happening there. And we can do that with different patterns. Patterns can be tight together. They can have shadow, and that contrast of color is going to tell us that difference between rough and smooth. And that might be another way that we help distinguish our content and and use all of these things. But how we print something in a newspaper would very much be with serif fonts. They're easier to read and the written word, and you can make them smaller. But if I had the same information online, which I might with a newspaper, have a printed version. All right, there's elements of design and there are principles of design. Elements are kind of the big thing, what we're looking at. And then principles of visual design is the sort of effects that we can do with each of those elements. So we can bring a focal point, which is what we want to do. We want to boil this research that you have that is vast, right? Lots and lots of pages of your thesis or your dissertation or other research that you're doing. And you want to boil it down to one takeaway, right? One or more takeaways. And you'll do that visually by giving it a focal point, by making it the thing on your poster that is grabbing attention. By the first thing that you look at, that is the first thing you're looking at. So if you, that was a weird way to say that, but if you're looking at my screen, you are looking, your eye is being drawn probably to the orange poster because it's bright and it's taking up so much. But all of those ways, which we can actually use all together, are going to help support our content. So, but let's say, what are we looking at here? If you look at this slide, what grabs your attention first? And for me, it's that giant block of gold. It's taking up a lot of real estate. It's a big, bright color, and it's bringing me into the content, which is focal point, balance, contrast, and repetition. Yeah, so focal point, we want to bring attention, and no matter where it is on the screen, it's going to bring attention to it. If we assume a poster is going to be written in English, which is read from left to right, top to bottom, that top corner is super important. Balance is another way that we can support our content, the elements in our layout. So we have pieces of information, and how much screen real estate they take up helps us know how important they are. That's why we see headings and titles being in big, bold letters, because they're bigger than everything else on the page, because they're more contrasting, because of their placement at the top of the page. We know in the hierarchy, this is important information, and it's more important than little information that's after it. So we can take a look at the elements on our page and balance them in a way that brings attention to the hierarchy of our information. You need to know this before you know this, before you know this. Contrast is another great way to highlight information. We want to bring attention and differentiate content on a page. This you might see in having different highlights between content. Looking at this slide right now, I can see that the title of the content, Principles of Visual Design, has a very contrasting foreground to background. It has that maroon with white writing. It's on the top of the page. From just the design itself, I can tell that that's the point. That's the thing about this slide. That's what this slide is about. Right under it, I have also a very contrasting white on black, more contrasting even, but the text is smaller and it's placed below. So it tells me it's sort of a subheading. So that is one way that we can show that contrast can also support the hierarchy of our content, which is sort of learn this before you learn this, before you learn this. Brenda has another great question. What's the rule for body copy in a post, specifically a lot of descriptive type in a social media post? What a great question. Yeah, so the media in which you are putting out your content is going to the rule for body copy. It's usually, so it depends, right? And print, it's usually 2 alphabets of letters in one line, but it'll vary. The last of the principles of design is repetition. We want to unify elements and make font to be the same font size, to take up the same amount of space. We want all our headings to be the same typeface. We want them to be the same size. We want them to be the same color, so that we can create that sort of learnability within our posters. And we can do that even with one page of posters or over whole chapters of books, right? We can say all of the titles of chapters are the same font size. So the elements, go back to slide, are color, typography, shape, and color. The principles is the things that we can do within those elements. A couple more: proportion and movement in white space. And that's a confusing one, so we'll get there in a second. Proportion has to do with the equally scaled elements. In other words, if you had a piece of graph paper behind your poster, you would put things evenly within the grid lines. When you do that and you put them in proportionate, so big things get a lot of space, little things get little space, and those are all proportionate, we can actually put a bunch of information on our post. The next thing is movement. We want to lead the viewer through the content. And so kind of coming back to those other principles of design is that big things to small things seem to have a pattern. Consume this piece of information, then this one, then that one. And it helps create a little bit of movement within our content. White space, not necessarily white, just talking about blank space, but that's the designing name for it, is perhaps the biggest culprit. Again, when I'm seeing academic posters, is wanting to put content literally everywhere. And I will say that's a very academic thing to do, right? We don't have resume, and certainly in certain formats that makes a lot of sense. An academic poster tends to be that way as well. We'll take a look at some posters in a minute and I'll show you, and you've certainly seen them before, that are just full of words. Well, it's hard to distinguish what's happening. Less is more. Give them less information. Does that sound scary? Sure, it sounds scary because you know more about whatever you're researching than anybody else. You know so much more about it, and it's so hard to boil it down that it makes it hard. But to communicate our message, we have to boil it down. All right, think about what it is that you do. And if you meet someone new, and they ask, oh, what are you studying? Well, I imagine that it's very complicated, right? I would say, oh, I'm in graphic information technology. And then people will look at me like, oh, I don't know what that is. I have no connection to what that is. Fun fact, it doesn't mean anything. But if I meet someone and I say, oh, I'm a graphic design professor, they go, oh, okay, got it. I understand what that means. So sometimes to be concise, we have to tell the story to our audience in a way that they would understand. You're going to change the language so that you can communicate with that audience. So we have to keep that in mind. And in that case, sometimes less is. Let's take a look at some examples of papers or posters. When you're looking at academic posters, you can put them horizontal or vertical. So think about your content and what makes sense in terms of focal points and takeaways. If you want them to know this, this, and this, is that going to be best served with a vertical long page or a really wide horizontal page? So think about taking that information and putting it in the space that it needs to best tell that story. A couple things I really love about this poster. I think on the screen, you probably can't see any of the paragraph text because it's way too small. Again, if this were a poster, that would be a different situation. It's on the screen on a slide, so it doesn't work as well. So knowing your medium is always the first one. University of Buffalo, and it points, right? So here's a very geometric shape. It's in a very bold blue box. It's got details even on it, the little light blue. It grabs my attention and it pulls me to the conclusion. And that might be the only thing I want people to walk away with. So I do really like that. Whereas the vertical one isn't really doing the same thing. So that's an opportunity here that I really like. As I'm telling this story, though, just being vertical or horizontal is going to be a great way to do it. In this one, we have 4 columns of content, and in the vertical, we have 3 columns of content. So it just kind of depends on what kind of content you have and what helps best tell its story. Other things that I really like about these 2 posters are the amount of graphics. I think probably compared to the amount the academic posters that you've seen in the past that are just filled entirely with text and maybe 1 or 2 photos, this one is telling a lot of the story with graphics, with charts and graphs. That's a great way to bring a user in. It's an opportunity to use some color. Again, grab attention, focal point, that sort of thing. If I'm adding pictures, I want to make sure the pictures are relevant and they're adding content. So is it important to see a picture of your team that did the work? It might be, if that's part of your content and you're wanting to show the team. If it's just, this is fun, let me put in a fun picture of the team, then it's maybe a lost opportunity on that page. Again, it's up to you and your content and what you want to share as your message. If part of your message is very strong, that you have this wonderful, diverse team of 12 people, then you should put that image in. All right, let's take a look at some more examples. Here is a good one. Again, you might not know anything about the content, but you can get yourself through it, right? If you're looking at this, what is the very first piece of content that your eye goes to? I am confident that I know where the headers are. And I'm seeing it on the screen of like a 1 inch big on my presenter. And I can see, even though I can't read it, I know exactly where all of the headers are. Lainey says the title font stands out because it's so dark. Absolutely. It's the biggest and darkest content text on the screen. So it's very much so standing out. It's also got a great shape behind it. That's a banner. And that banner even has some 3D, there's some shading, makes it feel like it's coming out at you. That one is using shape, it's using placement, it's using color contrast to make us know that it's the first thing that we see. It's also using that sort of top left place of prominence that we would normally come in to read, right at the top left. It's got an arrow kind of pointing you into it. Rachel says my eyes went right to the graphics. Yeah, absolutely. The graphics really stand out. And hopefully they're going to have some information in there that is the takeaways that we want to do. So we can see the hierarchy from this poster because we can see that the big banner with the bold contrasting letters that actually takes up the entire front spot of the poster. And then we can see that the minor focal points are those banners within that have that orange background. I can clearly see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 chunks of content. And even though I can't read them from this level, I know exactly where they are. Valeria says, I've always wondered if it's expected of these posters to be dense with information or if it's just a matter of skill and being concise. I'm new to research, but I've seen a lot of others work. That is an absolutely great question. And I'll go back to saying academia likes it wordy, right? We like to have a 1,000-page CV that's very prestigious. We like to have posters that are filled with lots of information. But what we need to keep in mind is if we really want to speak to our audience, then we need to put in the amount of content that will reach them. So if I am at a science fair and we have projects from all sorts of places and we have viewers from all sorts of levels, I'm going to stick with the less is more. I'm going to put the bigger headlines on the page. But if I'm at a conference with the top 100 people in my field and they know very well what it is, I'm probably going to have a little bit more wordy of a poster, but I'm still going to use these principles and elements of design to help lead folks to that content. I hope that makes sense. It's really that difference between a resume, which should be 1 page, and a CV, which should be all of the pages. And it's certainly something that academics, we struggle with. So is it expected for them to be dense? Perhaps. But wouldn't it be great if they also had some visual interest that helped you lead through that density of work? Yeah, depends on your audience, depends on what you're doing, but that is a great question. It is certainly a thing. Now, there's a ton of content on these. These are just some examples that I pulled from the internet. These are infographics. An infographic is a really great way to get your content out there and relies heavily on graphics to do so. So again, on this, when you take a look at it, what does your eye go to first in each situation? Well, there's a ton of information on these slides, and it is not as clear as this one, where I can clearly see the heading and the subheadings. But there is a lot of information on here, and there's a lot of graphics to help pull me through that information and know where to start that information. So thinking, whether you put that in the chat or think to yourself, on the poster for infographic tools on the left, starting on the top left, where do your eyes go? They look great. Maria, that's great. That's a good first impression. This looks good. I may want to look more at it. My eyes see this and go, it's organized, it's well put together. Let's go ahead and look at that information. Whereas if it's a clutter of just words, it's a little bit harder to know where to start. Yeah. I can tell that if that box of content that's in the background is pink, this first box here, has some information. I need to see this. And then I can see these big blocks of information. And then these statistics, look at those big, bold percentages. That's a great way to give feedback or space to the thing that you want people to take away. The thing you want them to know is 54% of something, blah, blah, blah. Marcia says there's no movement in these. It's chaotic. Yeah, a little bit for sure. They could definitely be a little bit less chaotic on this because there are so many colors. You've got like 5, 6 colors on here. In fact, they have their branding right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different colors. There is a lot going on, and there isn't necessarily a focal point. When I look at it, not one thing sticks out more than another. Brenda says my eyes went right to find out those graphic elements might be explanations of the large part of the piece. Yep. Anne-Marie says color cohesion. Yeah, the color is really well kind of put together, and it varies to highlight different content. Lainey says it definitely invites me to read it, but it's slightly overwhelming. Cameron, hey Cameron, how are you doing, buddy? Lots of accessibility issues. Yes, absolutely. So many. So one of the things we want to keep in mind about our content is it has to be large enough for our audience to see, and there has to be enough contrast between the foreground and the background in order to highlight that content, in order for people to see that content. And so this is something that's really hard for a lot of us to do, is that many of us are very visual. Many of you are probably younger, an audience, and your eyes work in a different way than others. And so when we're looking at the contrast of our content between the foreground and the background, we really need some tools to kind of help us make sure that it's dark enough. One of the academic-y things that I see a lot in posters is light gray writing, and light gray on white is not great. You want to stick to contrasty, as bold as you can. So a really dark gray or a black, or just a lot of contrast so folks can see it. Thanks for mentioning that, Cameron. Alexander, are the left and the right sides part of the same presentation? The color palette is different from each, but it also looks like different topics. These are actually like template infographic information that you can find if you Google infographics, and it'll help you kind of look at the different ways you can present information. And so what I wanted to show here was, one, there's a lack of focal point in sort of both of these things. And when you do have sort of things bringing your attention, like take a look at this Venn diagram, think, is this the way that I should present my content? If I have this kind of content and it's complicated and I want to show that and communicate that best to a user, is it best done with a Venn diagram like this? Because this is a complicated set of information that is being graphically driven to be more understandable. Or does it make more sense like this in a timeline, A, B, C, D, then E? Does this format support the content that you have to show the flow of the content that you're showing? This one is far more of a timeline, and you can see that one leads into the other. This one has more of gauges, right, of showing kind of the amount on a scale, which is a great way to show information. So this would be a great slide to come back to when you know about your content and you know how you want, how it could best be displayed, and maybe choose from some of these options and definitely look at more to see what's the best way to communicate my message to that audience. And sometimes with a nice graphic and one of these different formats is going to be the way. The headings in this one are fantastic. I definitely know where each section starts and what the name of it is. And this is so important because as humans, we are skimming our content. When you're reading your textbook, you're skimming the headings, right? Here's the chapter heading, here's this. You're looking for the content you're looking for, but That's what we do as humans. We skim for the content. So I might go infographic tools, no. Option elements, no. Horizontal bar graphs. Yes, I do want to know about that. So now I'm going to consume that information. And then line graph, maybe I want to skip that. Then I go to bar graph. We skip information, and having those big bold headlines allows us to do that. Let's take a look at two more, and I'll give you some resources. Taking a look at this very typical poster for academia. You may not be able to read it, and that's okay. It's super fuzzed out. But do you know where the headings are? Does it have too much text? Are you going to read all the text? This first abstract chunk of information is all text. It's a big chunk of text. How can I break that up? Right? If an abstract is super important, and it is, and I want to give it the space that it needs, maybe it needs more space and bigger letters, or maybe it needs to be boiled down to a bullet point list, something like that. Boy, there is not much padding around the text. Increasing the line height, increasing the font size would all help aid the readability. And if you can read it, then you can understand it. And if you can't read it, then you're not going to understand it. And you're not going to take away anything. Here's another one, pretty typical. SIDAPS is too many details. I agree. Again, it depends on your audience, right? If you're in a group of experts, having data sets are going to be super important. They're going to want to see that. They don't necessarily need to see a lot of words though, right? You need to see kind of what it boils down to. Here's another pretty typical poster that you see in academia. Title on the top, you've got the logos on the top, and then chunks of information. This slide is sort of a scattershot of all the different types of ways that graphics could look. So you would pick and choose only the ones you need, right? I wouldn't overwhelm your work with too many of these. But if you saw, oh, this Venn diagram is a brilliant way to convey a very complicated information that I have, this might be a good way to do it. Oh, you can see where I'm going. So this is good. So if you just type in ASU branding, you're going to go straight to the ASU brand guide, and I'll just pop this in the chat for you. And then it's called the 2024 ASU presentation, and icons, photos, all of the things. I'll even, it automatically will make a copy for you. So you can, you can find the ASU brand standards online. Is there a minimum font size that's readable for acceptable text? There absolutely is. Generally larger than 14 to 16 with a contrast ratio of 1 to 4.5. Yeah, it depends again on your medium. How much space do you have? Thank you all so much. You have content here. I'll go ahead and go back to the QR code so you can get it there. You'll have links to all of these references that I have.
Thank you so much, Christina, for joining us. Amazing as always. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.